Welcome back, everybody. Happy Spooktober. This video is not one about Spooktober, although there will be one movie later on that is spooky that we will touch on. But today's video is actually going to be about the wonderful Criterion collection and my obsession with it. So I bought my first Criterion. That would be Seven Samurai. I bought that one a few years ago, and I've been pretty much addicted ever since. Ever since I was a young child, I've been pretty obsessed with owning and collecting physical media, whether that's movies, video games, books, you name it. I have way too much of it. Obviously, that extended to Criterion when I discovered them a few years back. I'm a bit of a nut job when it comes to stuff like this because, I really like uniformity and a sense of a collection, especially when, you're putting it on a shelf. So pretty much immediately after buying Seven Samurai, the first Criterion I ever got, I was hooked immediately. So today's video, I could spend the entire time talking about why I love Criterion. They release such a wonderful array of films from all over the world. I've discovered so many classics, watched so many masterpieces that I would have never heard of if not for the label. And, some people can criticize it all they want for not releasing, whatever dream Criterion they have. But as far as I'm concerned, they're doing wonderful work out there, putting out and preserving all of these films that would not have been released physically otherwise. And, they're doing a fantastic job of preserving film as well. I could see myself doing more of these, turning into a little series, but I just want to talk about the last 5 Criterions that I watched. Seemed like a little fun video to do. And there are some pretty relevant films here. You'll see why. We'll get into it right now. So first up, we have a Criterion that pretty much as soon as I became involved with this community, I heard people crying out to the heavens for. And it was announced, released. I bought it, I'm pretty sure the day it came out because I was just as excited as everybody else. But that would be Martin Scorsese's After Hours. We got the 4K here. Transfer looks stunning. So I watched After Hours for the first time earlier this year, I believe sometime around March, during my Scorsese marathon, as, of course, it is the year of Scorsese. Killers of the Flower Moon releases in only 10 days, so you can see why this is pretty relevant. A lot of people don't know about After Hours. I feel like it's pretty slept on. And, the first time I watched it, I wasn't immediately taken with it, but once the Criterion was announced, of course, I just had to pick up the 4K. And I think the second time around, it really clicked with me. It is very darkly humorous. It's one of those movies that I'd refer to as an anxiety nightmare, something along the lines of Uncut Gems or Beau's Afraid. Just a movie that wants to make you as uncomfortable as possible. It definitely succeeds in doing that, but it's also outrageously funny. Griffin Dunne just has the worst night of his life. The making of this film was actually pretty interesting when you look at Scorsese's career as a whole, because he had just come off of making Raging Bull, The Last Waltz, King of Comedy. He was on a real tear in the 80s, but he took this as a real challenge as a filmmaker because I'm sure we all know Scorsese is known for his overly long run times, massive budgets as of late. Very dense movies. This is a quick 97 minutes. You're in and out. It's real snappy. I think they shot it in a very tight time frame. So, Marty really took this as a challenge to, return to his roots as a young filmmaker. He, made it on a relatively small budget. But, when you have the craft of Martin Scorsese and, the team with, Thelma on editing, the great performance from Griffin Dunne, and of course Rosanna Arquette, you just get a wonderful, wonderful comedy that will make you extremely uncomfortable, but you'll definitely laugh a lot. If you're like me and you never heard of After Hours, definitely give it a watch. It's definitely worth your time, especially if you're a fan of Scorsese. So the next up, we have a film that couldn't be more of a polar opposite than After Hours. And of course, I had heard of it. I had never seen it, though. And, when I went to Barnes & Noble to pick this up when it came out, the nice lady working behind the register, of course, commented on it, said, what a wonderful film. This is a classic. And I'm like, well, I'm about to find out because I'd never seen it. And she was thoroughly shocked. but that film would be Thelma and Louise. So what do you get when you take the well-known action auteur Ridley Scott and you take the strong female screenwriter Callie Corey and you mix them together? Turns out you get a pretty banging film. Released in 1991, Thelma and Louise was actually pretty progressive for its time. You got two very strong female leads with Susan Sarandon and Gina Davis, both of which are just giving absolute fantastic performances. I believe both of them were nominated for Best Actress, which is a very rare occurrence that two performances both get nominated for lead from the same film. But at this, just because they're both so incredible, like you could not separate one performance from the other because it's very much a team effort in Thelma and Louise in bringing these characters to life. So of course, this is one of those classic road trip movies, but it's got definitely some pretty dark undertones, especially considering how the road trip begins and, you know, the problems that they have that lead them on this cross-country road trip. It is a real treat to watch unfold, as bleak as it can get at times. There's that great scene when they're on the run, and I believe it's Gina Davis's character calls home, and her husband is sitting around with the police, and they tell him not to act suspicious. And up until that point, her husband had just been the biggest dick to her, just a raging misogynist, just a total asshole. And of course, she calls home, and they tell him not to act suspicious, so he acts all super friendly, and she immediately knows something's wrong. That phone gets hung up immediately, and I let out the loudest laugh. It was an extremely hilarious situation, but that's only, you know, one very specific scene from this movie. The whole thing is incredible, and especially that ending. I mean, I'm sure we all know, it's quite a ubiquitous moment when they drive off the cliff at the end. I think we've all seen probably that freeze frame before, but not knowing the context of it and finally seeing it happen, the second that happened and those credits rolled, I was alone in my basement watching it. Nobody wanted to join me for this classic road trip film, but I nearly stood up and started clapping because it is such an incredible ending to an amazing movie, and it's just so euphoric, and it's like a real sense of release that, you know, Thelma and Louise are forever frozen midair. Did they go down, or did that Chevy keep going up in the air? They probably ascended straight into Valhalla. I wouldn't be surprised. But incredible movie, 10 out of 10 ending. It is awesome. All right, next up, the first foreign film out of the 5, we have Jūzō Itami's Tampopo. Now, this is one of those more obscure films that I had never heard of before entering the Criterion hive mind. I'd become interested in it pretty much the second I read about it. I mean, it's a movie about ramen, about making the perfect bowl of ramen, about how food is important to us and how food is a communal experience, how it brings us together. So after seeing people recommend it online all the time, reading more about it, and the fact that I'm visiting Japan in a couple months, and I thought that this would be a justified purchase, as, you know, it's preparing me for my trip. It turns out Tampopo is an amazing comedy, but it's also a very touching film. But what director Itami does in Tampopo, it's really something special because it has, you know, shades of a comedy. It's pretty dramatic. It also has dashes of the Western genre in it, in the way that the two men who discover the failing ramen shop at the beginning of the film, you know, they are, you know, cast as Ronin. They're kind of these wandering truck drivers who sort of just stumble into this widow's ramen shop. You know, one of them immediately remarks that her water isn't boiling and that they know that this bowl of ramen is about to be mid. And so, you know, she realizes that these guys are experts, and she begs them to teach her how to make the perfect bowl of ramen. And, you know, that's what you get for the next 2 hours. It's sort of like an underdog story. There's definitely shades of Rocky in there, as, you know, one of the truck drivers is riding a bike behind this woman as, you know, they're making her run around the city. He's got, you know, training her stamina, because if she's going to be running the shop by herself, she's going to have to do everything herself, and it's a lot of running around. You know, as somebody that works in the restaurant industry, I know how sweaty you can get, you know, when you're on that grind, hustling around, providing, you know, customer service. So I definitely think that aspect of the film really spoke to me in, you know, wanting to provide good customer service and great food, of course. But It's also the fact that, it really is just ramen. I learned that it's sort of meant to be a food for the masses. It's inexpensive. It is everywhere in Japan, but a lot of people take a lot of pride in their bowl of ramen that they serve. There are a lot of shops in Japan, a lot of ramen shops that only serve one bowl of ramen. The menu, you get one thing. They have one menu item that they excel at, and they are very proud in what they're able to achieve. Tampopo is extremely educational. You not only get to learn about how important ramen is in Japan, how revered it is, even as a food, for the masses, and all at the same time, Itami does a lot of very unique things that you would not expect from a movie about food. It gets shockingly horny at times. If you've seen it, you know about that egg yolk scene. I won't spoil it, but it's pretty jarring and definitely not something that you would expect to just be, cut in mid-movie. There's actually quite a few little random vignettes that are thrown into the story. And these short little scenes, there's probably about 3 or 4 of them, I believe. And each one is totally unrelated to the main story, but they all add a certain layer or a certain new perspective on food and its importance and relevance in Japanese culture as well as, around the world. So I cannot recommend Tampopo enough. Not enough people have seen this. It's a great, great film. All right, next up, we got Scorsese number 2. It is The Last Waltz, his concert film about the band. So I had never listened to the band prior to watching this. I was excited to, dive in because, the second you load this puppy up, the title card immediately reads, "This film should be played loud." And I apologize to everybody in the house beforehand, but I did turn my TV up to 100, the max volume. When Marty tells you to do something, you listen. And he's absolutely right. This film is just full of so much joy and energy and just love for performance that it is it's a very transcendent experience. You watch the band perform what was their last show at the time. This was their farewell performance in 1978. They had agreed to disband the band. It seems like it was more on Robbie Robertson, who really wanted to call it quits because, the band did, eventually reunite without Robbie and continue to make music. But there is a real sense of finality in The Last Waltz because everybody there understood that at that point in history, this was the end of the band. And there is a real sense of importance to this film because Martin Scorsese shoots this thing like it is the most important date in human history. What I love most about The Last Waltz is how it inspired Scorsese in his future films. This was released in 1978, 2 years right before Raging Bull. Marty was going through a pretty tumultuous period in his life in the late 70s. When he made Raging Bull, he was fully prepared for that to be his last film before he ran off to Italy and lived there forever doing God knows what. In part due to The Last Waltz, it really inspired his work on Raging Bull. You'll know if you've seen The Last Waltz, there's very few shots of the audience. Most of the film is shot on the stage, around, through the band members. And it's clear that this obviously inspired him in Raging Bull, the way he shot all the boxing scenes within the ring. There's a lot more energy. You feel much more, in the film. To shoot the film, I believe it was either 6 or 8 cameras that he had set up throughout the venue, and they all ran. I think at the end of the film it says they were all running for over 6 hours straight on 35 millimeter film before they finally gave up and just turned off because they'd had too much. Listening to the behind the scenes on this was just so funny. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to be at such a momentous concert on Thanksgiving Day with that packed of a sold out crowd. Meanwhile, you got Scorsese up in the rafters, screaming into his walkie-talkie, trying to, coordinate all of his different camera teams, telling, with each one when to cut to, what angles to get, when to swoop the camera around. The dude is a madman, and it all pays off in The Last Waltz because this is easily top 5 Marty movies of all time. It absolutely blew me away. And I just heard that The Last Waltz is officially coming back to theaters in November. So if you saw Stop Making Sense, like I did, first time for that too, and you had an electrifying experience in the theater, seeing that with other people, you have to see The Last Waltz in theaters. I know I will absolutely be getting tickets for that. And the fifth Criterion I watched this month, the second Japanese film, one that fits the bill for spooky season. We got Onibaba. Now, I had bought Onibaba quite a long time ago, and I've sort of just been sitting on this, waiting for the right time to watch it. I'd say the one reason that I finally decided to turn it on, other than the fact that it's now Spooktober, was because the Philippou brothers, the Raka Raka boys, were promoting Talk to Me, and they talked about Onibaba being a big influence on their debut film. So I figured that movie was really good. If these brothers are telling their fans to watch it, and I already owned it, I should probably watch it. So I did, and they're right. I could definitely see the influences that it had on Talk to Me in the way that the Raka Raka boys, built their atmosphere in Talk to Me. That, silent dread that sort of, permeated throughout the whole film. That's all of Onibaba. It's pretty slow. It's definitely more of an atmospheric film that you go into for, more like, under the skin, spooks, not like jump scares or any of that messy modern garbage that we get these days. So I didn't think Onibaba was really all that scary. I think most of the value that modern audiences are going to get from it today is going to be, the art and the presentation of the film. The black and white cinematography really looks great, and the fact that they shot most of this movie in basically a grass field, with that those tall reeds of grass billowing through the wind. Director Kaneto Shindō does a great job of creating this really unsettling atmosphere. There's a lot of silence and a lot of long drawn out takes where you're kind of just watching. It could just be something as simple as the grass blowing in the wind, and it really freaks you out. I know it did me, at least. When you get to the real meat and potatoes of the story, it is pretty silly. There's this young girl who's waiting for her husband to return from a war, but unfortunately he doesn't make it home, but his best friend does, and she realizes that she's just got to, move on. If she has to homie hop, so be it. There's not many dudes out there in her village. Her mother is not a fan of their neighbor, and she really does not want her daughter seeing him. So most of the movie is her basically just trying to cock block her daughter-in-law. And it's pretty hilarious, the length that she goes to stop her daughter-in-law from seeing this other man. The freeze frame ending on this one is not as good as Thelma and Louise, but it will still stick with you for a long time. And, it's a little ambiguous, for my taste. I'm not a big fan of ambiguity, but it is a pretty unique horror film, and one that I could definitely recommend if you're into Japanese horror at all, or if you you like period dramas. It's a little bit of both. Just don't expect to be too scared unless you're under the age of 12, because I think that's where this really hits the hardest. So these are all the Criterions I watched this month. Feel free to drop a comment. Let me know if you are also a Criterion fan, fanatic, addict, whatever words you want to use. I welcome you. And I have one word of advice. Good luck to your wallet, because this is not an inexpensive hobby, and I do have a problem. And somebody should take my debit card away, because I've bought way too many the last few weeks. But, got to support physical media where you can. It is the lifeblood of my life, and one of the few things that brings me happiness. So whatever that says about me, so be it. As always, if you made it this far in the video, I love you. Thanks for stopping by. Drop a like. Be sure to subscribe. And let me know what kind of videos you guys would like to see. I could turn this into a series and keep talking about Criterion. I could just keep doing the last 5 I watched. This was fun. I like Criterion. I like talking about them. Maybe one of these days they'll invite me to the closet, You guys, if you're listening, I promise I'll only take like 5 or 15 of your movies. But in all seriousness, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Peace.